I'm Sarah Lorenz, the Special Events Manager at the Dixon. And if you have any questions during the presentation, please type them into the chat, and I will facilitate discussing that with Jennifer afterwards. But now let's just introduce Jennifer Sargent. Jennifer is one of our artists in the Dixon's current exhibition, Memphis 2021. Jennifer, the floor is yours.
So if you'd like to sort of put up the first slide. Okay. This is sort of, well, first of all, thank you to the Dixon for giving me this opportunity, both to display some of my work in the current exhibition and a chance to tell you about it. So these are two slides just to sort of introduce myself in two of my sort of favorite occupations, the garden and tapestry weaving. So let's go ahead. I don't know how many of you have ever had a chance to see a loom. This is a tapestry, and it's just sort of 4 pictures. Traditionally, people weren't taught, they simply observed their family and learned that way. In the top left hand, you can see the very simplest form of tapestry. It's got one set of threads called the warp, which are stretched tight. And you can see here, it's just on the ground, it's supported by rocks, and it allows tapestry or carpets to be done. On the upper right, someone is, there's a baby on her back, but it's what's called a backstrap loom. So she tensions that warp thread by how she leans backwards or forwards. And then the bottom to give you an idea of, it's a set of rigid sort of warp threads, and both the person on the left, who's a contemporary weaver, and the people on the right are working their way up the tapestry or carpet. The threads that go across don't go, well, there are 2 ways of working. They're what's called discontinuous threads that go horizontally across, and that's the weft. So it's really just 2 sets of threads, the warp, which is in tension, and the weft. Okay. And this has been going on for thousands and thousands of years. And so just to give you some sense, mostly it was to do with status, with clothing. These Andean tunics were part of a burial system, which is why we still have them. And it was in the sort of desert area. So this gives you some ideas. In the detail, you can sort of see that change in color, and that's what the discontinuous thread will do. Egypt, the Egyptian Coptic peoples also had tapestry tunics and what have you. Tabby is just an over one, under one, over one, under one in the weft thread. And then they would insert these sort of tapestries. And again, it told you about the status of the individual. So here we're looking at, 6th, 7th century AD. Okay. Next. And obviously, this was happening in different parts of the world. These are Central Asia, and these were if you can imagine, when it says 45 ends per inch, that's 45 warp threads in 1 inch. So these were very, very fine. Okay. I learnt tapestry weaving in New York City and was introduced to these 15th, 14th century tapestries. The Angers Apocalypse was a set of 100 at one point that were in all around a church, and it was all obviously about the different scenes from the apocalypse, and they were all sort of 8 by 5 feet, and were done in workshops I think that was in France. I think that was where the Gobelin in Paris was first allowed. Okay. It's another apocalypse scene. There was a whole sort of set of people working on these tapestries. It wasn't a single individual, although they could take a year or more to complete. And it was only the very experienced weaver that was allowed to do the faces. This is the Scheuer Tapestry Studio in New York, where I learnt tapestry weaving in the mid-80s. And this was in the middle of Soho on a second floor. So it was a sort of miraculous place to learn to weave. Traditionally, tapestry weaving in the Gobelin, it's called the Gobelin style, which is an upright loom. It was, you worked it from the back, usually sideways, and you looked through the warp threads at a mirror so that you could see the front of the tapestry. So I learned, I did all the sort of work like bobbins and finishing and so on, and then they taught me in the afternoon sort of the various techniques. And the way they were set up was they had about 350 colors, and you mixed them much like painting. If you're trying to paint, you have your different colors and you mix them together to get the color you want. In tapestry weaving, one of the ways that you can do that is by mixing different colors on your bobbin, which is inserted in the weft. Okay. And this was my very first tapestry. I was doing watercolor, going to the Art Students League, which is a very long history in New York. And that was my sort of attempt at just trying to interpret one type of working to another. So from watercolor to wool. So watercolor is very transparent. Wool is very dense and sort of stops the light. I went back to grad school because I wanted to investigate designing for tapestry. Tapestry takes a long time, and I was won a grant from, and I was in Arizona, and I won a grant to go to West Dean in Chichester in England to study there. And so this is a picture of the marvelous, one of my favorite places. It has the most fantastic gardens, and it's also the largest sort of pebble stone building. So here's just some glimpses of it, and it has a marvelous walled garden. And okay, and more of the walled garden, and then on the right they remade the Victorian greenhouses, and this is the way they grow the melons. So they grow them upright and have the little sort of supports for them. Marvelous. The professional studio started with Henry Moore Tapestries. His daughter, she commissioned them to translate some of his drawings into tapestries, and it gives you an idea of the size. They translate from very small drawings to very large tapestries. And in the studio, they still work on, the professional studio is still in existence, and it works on commission. And what they'll do is they'll get in something from an artist or you know, a company that wants to see a piece as a tapestry. And generally they'll want them larger. And so here you get to see how they'll select a little piece. So what they're going to do is to give the commissioning people an idea of what it might look like so that they can decide whether to go ahead. So they've selected a little area, and then you can see how she's blown up the size. And here they also dye their own colours, so they will have dyed. This is the other type of loom that traditionally tapestry is woven on, and it's called an Aubusson, low warp Aubusson loom. And this gives you a sense again of how they go about starting to weave a tapestry. That's a John Piper painting on the top, and they break it down into areas, and that's called the cartoon. And what they're doing is sort of deciding how they're going to treat the different areas, how they'll break up the initial painting so that it can become something that can be woven. And then they then photographically enlarge that cartoon so it's to the size that they're actually going to weave the piece. On the back wall, you can see a couple of finished John Pipers, and then the one that they're just starting on the loom at the front. And just a sense of how there's a sort of turn back at the start, and they'll sort of use it to sort of try out their colours to see if they, you know, if they're the way that they want them to be. And then they have a classroom that's separate from the professional studio. And this gives you a sense. People used to be able to get a sort of a graduate degree there. There was a year-long class, but I went there for 6 weeks. And so this is an idea of the different studio, little areas that students were working in. And this was my little area, and I would go out and draw in the gardens. They had ways of sort of, one of the things that they did to sort of break down any sort of self-consciousness was they locked me in a dark cupboard with a lot of newspaper and a lot of colours, and you just made marks so that you weren't looking at what you were doing, you were just sort of using energy and direction to sort of produce something. And this was my first full-scale tapestry. And that gives you a sense of, I got about as far as you can see, and then I wrapped it all up and brought it home, restretched it and finished it here in America. And this was really the first, at grad school, this was the first piece that I did that was based on ideas that I was interested in pursuing. Was very much about the sort of chaos of grad school and the way that they push you and the disorientation that you can feel. After grad school, I went into teaching, and I was first in Texas. And this is just some of the ways that I started exploring, again, my own ideas. And I was looking at pre-Columbian open work tapestry and really enjoying it, and exploring how I could do that for myself. And this is the finished piece that you saw started in the previous slide. And this is in the collection of the Tennessee State Museum now. But in the detail, you get a sense of the open work and seeing through the open work to the place behind. I'm very interested in this idea of the layering of experience and how to sort of show that in the work that I was doing. So the first part sort of refers to traditional tapestry, and the second part sort of refers to the garden. And again, just more explorations, different ways of working with open work. And again, that sort of layering. This time, the first layer allows for more of the layer behind to be seen. And again, it has that reference to the garden, to nature. And here again, I'm manipulating the thing. So although it was woven flat, I felted it, which requires sort of elbow grease and water and soap to sort of get the wool fibers to sort of felt up. And then I sort of manipulated the piece. And again, it has a reference to the Silk Road and Samarkand and some of the sort of colors that I associate with that sort of time. And again, more of the open work. Here you can see the tapestry is sort of down one side with the open work. And then on the back, I've exploring embroidery on top of dyed fabric. So again, it's that sort of sense of different ways of experiencing the garden. And the open work has a sort of sense of rain, thinking about some of those wonderful Japanese prints that you can see, and just sort of trying to give that sense of blossoming and the way the rain brings life. And this was it's Winter Queen. It's again pre-Columbian textiles. I had the chance to go to the old textile museum in DC and to really see some of these, you know, first century, second century pieces up close. And so this was sort of part of my reaction to that. On the far right, you can see my cartoon. And I never like to sort of give everything fixed, because that to me would be boring. So that I started out there, and you can sort of see with the piece in the middle how I added to it and how the different marks were translated into tapestry weaving. And I'm interested, and because I like nature and gardening, that sort of cycle, that idea of the cycle of life is something that I think sneaks its way into the work that I do. And in the detail, you could see, in the detail, you could see some of the way the open work is approached with a different manner. And when it hangs, you get these wonderful shadows that, that you can see behind the piece. I do quite a lot of drawing, so I'll sketch in my, my sketchbook ideas. Here, I've sort of left that sort of open work idea, and I'm now looking at these ideas of using pattern. Pattern is very much part of my work, and using that as a way of talking about how we set up patterns in life. We're always trying to sort of make things so that there are no surprises. And so I'm starting to approach this idea of a pattern, a disruption, and then a further disruption. And here again, you can see this is some of the initial drawings. I think one of the reasons I'm attracted to tapestry is because I'm very slow. I like to do things slowly. I like to develop. I like detail. And it doesn't seem to matter what I'm doing, whether it's drawing or tapestry. It always is very detailed and takes time. So again, I think you can see there's a pattern set up, and then there's a disruption to the pattern, and then there's an attempt to mend that original pattern. And then even after you've done that, something else comes in. And for me, I use the shadow, sort of hands, shadows, as a way of disrupting even the sort of mended pattern. And then this is another series. There's, in the show, there's another in this series, which is the bears. Instead of the yellow rabbits, it's red bears jumping. And I used that as a sort of place to explore for tapestry. And here you can see the cartoon on the left, and then on the right is my upright loom with the warp stretched and the tapestry beginning. And you can see the cartoon is behind it so that I have a guide, and then I weave. And this is the finished piece. So you can see I'm very interested in textures, in sort of the way that with the yarn, and you can vary the textures so much. And that to me is one of the wonderful sort of things about weaving. I don't know if you know the Women's Foundation for a Greater Memphis. Every year they pick 4 or 5 women who've done fantastic things for Memphis, and then they commission an artist and a writer to portray, something about that person. And I was lucky enough to have Carolyn Hardy, who's an amazing woman. And this is the piece that I did for her, but is owned by the Women's Foundation. The next sort of series that I became interested in, and again, you can see part of this, I was thinking about fairy tales, but I was interested in that sort of initial beauty of the fairy tale, and then an exploration of what's hidden in the fairy tale, which is perhaps not so nice. And again, in my drawings, I've got sort of layers. I've got a sort of grill work that goes over the sort of patterned work. And this is the piece that's in the show. And it's actually, so you will have a chance to really see it's actual 2 layers, not just an idea of 2 layers on one surface. There's actually 2 surfaces, and I've cut through one surface so that you can see the one behind. And this is the tapestry that I did in that series of fairy stories. So again, it's sort of that idea of seeing through something being interrupted, the hidden figures and the different flowers and the sort of trellised idea. This is this sort of how simply you can do tapestry. It's just stretcher bars from the art store and warp yarn that's just wrapped around, and then yarn that you use to weave. This is, whoops, can we go back one? Thanks. I started to get interested in sort of having more exaggerated textures. And so this is what you can, the start of that sort of series, landscapes, and just that sort of abstracting a little bit more than I had been doing. So again, just pursuing that sort of idea of landscapes. So imagine, well, things that are in my memory, but are not necessarily straightforwardly shown. And this is the piece that's actually in the show. So this is the start of it, to give you some sense of how I arrived at it. So in the top left, you can see all the sort of samples. I do lots of sampling, especially when I'm exploring new ideas, because it takes so long to do a full scale piece. One tries to make sure that it's going to work. So you can see the cartoon there as well as the samples. And then on the right, I've created a shape, and this is how I sort of did it. There's gaps in the weaving, and it's what's called a pulled thread. And after everything's off the loom, I pulled all the threads so that the gaps were that the bottom of the gap met the top of the gap, which forced the side pieces into textures and shapes. And this is the piece that's in the show, and you can see how it's shaped the piece itself. So again, I went on a trek in Nepal, and there were these fantastic, probably, I don't know if they're called moraines or not, but the shapes that would come down from the mountains were just incredible. And just that juxtaposition of something so cold and vast against something sort of intimate, like a garden. That was the sort of sense I was going for here. And I belong to the American Tapestry Alliance. And what they did just a while ago is they had what's called a postcard exchange. So you wove a 5x7 inch piece of tapestry, attached it to a postcard, and sent it off to somebody just through the post to see if it would get there. And it did. Again, still thinking about landscapes, but exploring just the shaping of tapestries. So these are very small. And again, so they're small and they're domestic. And these are small, but starting to sort of think about some of the things happening to our landscape, thinking about the ways that humans are affecting it. And this idea of archaeology and the way there is evidence of our existence on this earth. And I wanted to do a very large piece, and it just was very intimidating, this idea. Well, for me, large, which was going to be 53 inches. So I did lots and lots of samples, and then I did a smaller piece to sort of get myself feeling brave enough to tackle the larger piece. And then I just leave you with this piece, which is in process, the actually larger piece. So you can sort of see how it's a sort of culmination of all those pieces that you just saw before, but it's thinking about the effects. The colouring of the bottom part is to do with all the fires that we've been having, and just the sort of, you know, the terrible beauty of those fires. And then on top, this idea of all the different effects that we've had. Again, that sort of layering of civilization. Okay.
Jennifer, is that the conclusion of the slides?
That's the conclusion.
Well, thank you very much. That was fascinating. Understanding the process, the samples, the nerve it takes even to get up the nerve to do something large. I have a couple of questions. There are some comments in the chat that I'll read, and feel free to add your questions as well. One question is, how did they make designs on the tapestry?
You can do it the way I did, which is just to have it sitting behind, so that you can just sort of pull the cartoon up to the threads and check where you're going. The other way is that you literally mark the warp. You have something like a Sharpie, and you twist the threads around so that you can follow a curve or a shape. It's not generally something you want to do if you're working on a light coloured tapestry, because it can show through.
Okay. What is the fiber content of the warps on the open work pieces?
Generally, they're linen. So that's, and some of them I would dye, but I don't have easy access to dyeing now, so I tend to sort of show them. The piece that's in the show is actually what's called seine twine, which is what they traditionally made fishermen's nets out of. And it's got some sort of stretch to it. The linen doesn't have quite so much stretch to it, but is a beautiful thread.
So then we've got a couple comments I'll read for you. Mary Jo says the range of this work is really incredible. It really did encompass more types of tapestry than I was expecting to see. I appreciate you sharing that with us. Mary Kay loves all the surprises that become evident as you study this work, and that the postcards is around when she wrote that postcard exchange was really darling.
Very nerve-wracking, and again, this is the idea of just giving it to the post office after having spent your time making it and going, oh well.
It's pretty sweet. Julie Peretti wants to thank you for sharing your beautiful work with all of us, and wants you to know how proud we are to have your work at the Dixon. And then I had a question. well, I want to comment. I think you've given us a new framework, some of us a new framework for looking at tapestry, that concept of disruption of the pattern, like finding a pattern and then disrupting it and having another pattern and disrupting it. I loved that. And I also wanted to know, how did the Tennessee State Museum and other organizations that now house your pieces and own them, how do they find out about you?
I had a piece in a show at the museum and they bought it out of the show. I don't know if they still do, but they did have a curator who was just the textile curator. And I don't know whether they've continued that, which, you know, is helpful when someone's looking at work. And yeah, I had 2 pieces that were in shows there. And then the third piece, I was invited to, what do they call it? They've got some organization that is for textiles and fashion. And I was one of the sort of invited to belong to that organization. And they bought another piece when I got that invitation. I think actually everything that I have sold has been because it was seen in a show.
That's awesome. Thank goodness for museums.
Thank you, thank you.
Well, also, Jennifer, do you have any concluding comments?
I
said it all?
I think I said it all. It's just very nice to get to share, because there's so little opportunity to see. I mean, you can see paintings everywhere, but you can't see tapestries very many places. It's just, you know, it's harder to show, and museums have rules about prints, about photographs, about fabric work, about how often they'll show it, for how long, and so on and so on. So I enjoy sharing things.
I have a question that I need to have cleared up, because I'm trying to figure out. From when I saw your yarn, when you first slide, I saw different color yarns, but I'm still not getting how that becomes a picture. How do you get the design? If an artist has drawn a picture, how do you get that design onto that yarn?
You mean the actual weft itself? Is that what you're talking about?
No, I'm talking about the actual picture on the yarn. How do you get the picture on the yarn? What?
That's the artistry of it.
Because
imagine the warp, right, is stretched very, very tight. And then this thread that's going to go over and under all those warp threads. And according to the image, you'll take, say, red for 4 warp threads, and then maybe the next one will be X number of warp threads. So you could have lots of colors hanging off the front. So your picture is behind, your threads are sort of in front, and you just weave.
And now I understand, when you told me that the picture is behind the thread, then what you're doing is trying to copy. I mean, you're getting that picture design from what you see on that behind me, right?
Right.
I got you. All right. Thank you for clearing that up.
We have one more question, Jennifer.
Okay.
Sharon asks if you can expand a little more about those shadow puppets. Did you play with finger puppets as a child?
Nope. I work a lot by intuition, and it's very quiet, but it just came into my head. So I just sort of went to the library and started looking up all these children's books to sort of see about shadow puppets. And it just it was just that idea. Shadow puppets are something that you create. And so in my work, it was like another twist on this idea of disruption. You know, you set up the first pattern, something comes in from left field, disrupts that pattern, and then you come in and overlay something else that you're trying to sort of do to sort of rectify the situation. So it had some of that element in it. And I just listened to my intuition that said, shadow puppet, shadow puppet.
That's fun. Well, thank you, Jennifer. And thank you for all of our guests today for attending. Next week, we have another Memphis 2021 artist, Brittany Boyd Bullock. And of course, we invite you to come to the museum to see this show in person. It is different than anything else I think I've seen since I've been with the Dixon. You're going to love it. And if you're not a Dixon member, we do encourage you to join. And please consider getting a gift membership for somebody if you have an anniversary or occasion to celebrate coming up. Thank you very much again, and take care. We'll see you next week.
Okay, thanks everybody. Bye.
Bye.